The horse archers of the East were known far and wide as masters of their craft, whose coming struck fear into the hearts of their foes. Yet while Western sources can certainly tell us what it was like to be on the receiving end of such attacks, they prove far less capable of providing details about the faceless hordes which assailed them from a distance. In this series, it will be our goal to bring life to the rich history of these Eastern warriors. Today, let us ride with the Sassanid horse archers.
You can learn much more about the ferocious horse archers of history through our sponsor, Magellan TV. Their series Warrior's Way does a fantastic job bringing to life units of various civilizations including the Norse, Scots, Celts, Romans, and more. Of particular relevance will be their episode on the fierce warriors of the steppe, namely the Mongols. It's great to see them in the flesh, with demonstrations of their equipment, tactics, and even daily life. Documentary videos like this are added weekly to Magellan TV, which already has a collection of over 3,000 videos to choose from among the categories of history, science, nature, space, and more. You can watch Warrior's Way or any documentary that catches your interest by clicking the link in the description below or going to try.magellantv.com/Invicta to get a 1-month free trial. Enjoy!
The Sassanid horse archers were the inheritors of a long tradition that stretched back millennia to the first Indo-European settlers who arrived in the Iranian plateau. It is in these early years that people of the region began to develop independent traditions of archery and horsemanship, which would eventually merge. Soon, an evolutionary arms race was underway among the various powers which wrestled for control of the region. This was further accelerated by frequent competition with steppe forces which were always on the bleeding edge of horse archery. Thus, it only took a few centuries before a few scattered soldiers were transformed into units, regiments, and armies. These would feature prominently in the militaries of the various empires which rose and fell across the East, with each incarnation of the horse archer leaving its mark on those which followed. Unfortunately, a comprehensive study of this topic will be outside the scope of our episode. We will therefore have to skip over the contributions of countless generations and be satisfied with discussing the passing of the baton, which occurred during the fall of the Parthians and the rise of the Sassanids. The former had been established in 247 BC when King Arashk I of the eastern Iranian tribe known as the Pani had rebelled against the Seleucids. In time, his dynasty would expand across the land, rising to become heirs of the ancient Achaemenid Empire. As such, they were able to wield considerable military forces, which proved capable of holding their own against the Romans. However, unlike their predecessors, the Parthian system of rule was far more decentralized than that of the Achaemenids. Thus, the 4.5 centuries of their rule was often subject to crippling bouts of internal unrest. It was during one of these episodes, in the early 3rd century AD, that Ardashir I came to control the province of Pars, from which he staged a revolt and then a conquest of the civil war-stricken Parthians. Doing so was not just a great feat of military achievement, but also of diplomacy, as the elements of the former Parthian Empire were now reforged into the new Sassanid Empire. While the descendants of Ardashir would reign as the shahanshah, or king of kings, the House of Sassan would rely to a great degree on the support of the other powerful clans of the realm. Chief among these were the 7 great Parthian houses, which had formed the bedrock of the prior administration. Keeping them in line was one of the great tensions of Sasanian history. This appears to have been done by way of a strong central authority and more robust means of domestic control. One of the most evident manifestations of this power was the new Sassanid army, known as the Espar. As with the earlier Parthians, its core was made up of an elite cavalry force, which was known as the Savaran. Drawn largely from the upper classes, its members fought both in close quarters and at range. This body was in turn supported by regional forces, mercenaries, and allies. Unlike the Parthians, these featured a greater diversity of troop types with a notably higher proportion of infantry. A thorough exploration of the Espar's various branches will have to be covered in another video. For now, let us look specifically at the Sassanid horse archers. These hailed from a wide variety of locations and consequently were a rather diverse force. For the sake of simplicity, such horse archers can generally be divided into two broad groups based on their origins. The first group consisted of those recruited from the provinces of the historical and cultural Iranian realm known as the Iran, while the second group were those which came from beyond this region, or the An-Iran. The core of the Iran included the regions of Pars, Media, and Parthia, whose militarized noble families provided much of the manpower of the elite-mounted Savaran. Surrounding these were other important regions which tended to manifest as auxiliaries. They included the important warrior tribes of Gelan, Gurgan, the Iranian Plateau, and Sakhistanis. Yet further afield would be the peoples of the frontier who served as auxiliaries or mercenaries. The Caucasus, for instance, were a prominent recruitment center for horse archers, with the Khazars, Alans, Savants, Sabirs, and Sunnati providing many warriors. Sassanid kings also worked hard to secure the support of Central Asian forces such as the Kushans and various Xiongnu-related peoples like the Hephthalites, Chionites, and Turkic tribesmen. It was an eclectic group, but all were united by a common way of life defined by a reverence of the bow and saddle. Let us now take a look at how they might be equipped for war. Again, it must be stated that this would have varied wildly and been subject to the particularities of each individual soldier. We will, nonetheless, endeavor to present a generalized view. For starters, most soldiers would have donned loose-fitting trousers, boots, and a knee-length tunic that was bound with a belt. Their head might be bare or covered by a cap. The pointed kulaf hat appears to have been associated with the Sasanian nobility. For many of the lighter cavalry, this would have been it for their defense. Speed would have been their best means of avoiding danger. Yet we have many depictions of horse archers being equipped with far more substantial gear, particularly among the nobles of the Savaran. This may have included scale or mail shirts with more advanced combined armor styles. Additional pieces might then be adopted to cover the thigh, shin, and forearm. Helmets, meanwhile, were also fairly common. Finds from earlier centuries reveal many conical and ridge helmets with hanging mail sides, while later centuries reveal an increase in more sophisticated pieces such as the Sasanian spangan helm. Based on the wealth of the warrior, these may have been inlaid with precious metals and adorned with jewels. For offense, the primary weapon of a horse archer was a powerful composite bow, known to the Persians as the kaman. Its core was made of a mixture of different types of wood, with animal horn being added to the front and sinew being added to the back. The bow was then painted and oiled. Such designs were common in the East at the time, being favored for their strength, flexibility, and ability to remain strung for long periods of time. As a backup, Savaran horse archers are said to have carried 2 spare bowstrings, or zay. This was all carried in a dedicated bow case, or kamandar, with 30 arrows being carried in their own quiver, or tirdan. This is to be contrasted with the earlier Parthian practice of housing both in a single goritos case. Horse archers may have strapped or slung these individual items across their body as they saw fit. However, in later centuries, they would adopt the lappet suspension system, which allowed for better control of one's gear. Sassanid arrows, or tigre, usually measured around 80 to 85 centimeters in length with wooden shafts and feathered fletchings. Heads varied widely based on their intended battlefield use, with tang and barbed designs appearing commonly in archaeology. For the purposes of firing these arrows, horse archers used all manner of finger rings, guards, and other devices. One fascinating piece of kit was the noak. It was a guide track which rested along the bow face, allowing one to overdraw a projectile. Researchers believe it was commonly used to fire small darts which could be carried in far greater numbers than traditional arrows. Other weapons carried by horse archers were also numerous. This could have ranged anywhere from simple daggers to axes, spears, swords, maces, and more. Considering that heavy cavalry often served hybrid roles, some would have also sported lances. As for the horses' gear, early riders used simple cloth saddles or four-horn variants. By the late 500s AD, stirrups began to be adopted. These granted cavalrymen an unprecedented level of stability, which was crucial for both lancers and archers. With the stirrup, not only could a mounted archer attain far greater accuracy and range, but they were also able to even more efficiently execute the infamous Parthian shot. Defensively, light cavalry wore very little. However, we have evidence that heavier variants used quilted or metal scale blankets to cover the body of the horse, with additional pieces added to protect vulnerable areas such as the face and neck. Thus equipped, let us see how these soldiers were trained and organized into fighting units. With regards to training, we know that Eastern horse archers were incredibly skilled. After all, many came from nomadic or semi-nomadic cultures whose way of life revolved around a mastery of the horse and bow. Here is how a Chinese historian describes this fact. Quote, "The little boys start out learning to ride sheep and shoot birds and rats with a bow and arrow, and when they get a little older they shoot foxes and hares. All the young men are able to use a bow and act as armed cavalry." While this level of commitment was not practical beyond the steppe, an appreciation for such skills was deeply embedded into the culture of the East. Militaries of more sedentary background therefore strove to instill this sort of drill into their men. The Sasanians, for instance, are believed to have trained from the ages of 5 to 24. They learned all manner of martial arts, such as wrestling, archery, spear throwing, and equestrian skills, whilst also practicing physical conditioning, discipline, and teamwork. We are told that these youths in training would often be instructed by professional veterans who bore the title of Andasbard, Aspwarrigan. It was a highly prestigious role whose qualifications were routinely subject to review. Such personnel could be seen in regular military barracks, but were also apparently dispatched to villages and cities across the realm to keep the general populace well practiced for war. Once youths had reached a sufficient level of military proficiency, they would then be allowed into the ranks of the military proper. For the elite Savaran, this meant undergoing years of rigorous training, discipline, and hard service through constant exercise in warfare and maneuvers. Sports such as polo, jousts, hunting, and arrow play further built up their skills. But education did not just involve physical tasks. Many knights were also drilled in intellectual courses involving writing, bookkeeping, logic games, song, dance, poetry, and more. Many Romans write admiringly of their professionalism, which in many cases rivaled or exceeded that of the legions. When it comes to organization, it is likely that the Sassanids employed a decimal system similar to the one employed by the earlier Achaemenids. The smallest tactical subunit was a Varsht of 100 men, led by a Varsht Salar, 10 of which formed a Drasv of 1,000 men, each of which had its own unique heraldry and battle standards according to their clans of origin. These were likely led by officers with the title of Hazarmad, literally meaning 1,000 men. The largest division of the Sassanid army was the Gund, led by the Gund Salar, that likely had around 10,000 men. Across the ranks would have been all manner of additional support staff meant to ensure the smooth running of a force. Auxiliary units and mercenaries, meanwhile, were expectedly less structured and uniform than those of the Sasanian Savaran. This issue was apparently addressed by assigning special Sardar officers to such forces to supervise them and ensure proper integration with the overall Espar. So, what would this have looked like in battle? Tactically speaking, such a diverse force as the Sassanid Espar had many options available to it depending on which foe they were matched against. Early on, we must imagine that they fought in a similar manner to the Parthians. As such, horse archers were more lightly equipped and would have been deployed ahead of the army with instructions to harass the enemy force. Researchers estimate these were capable of firing around 1 arrow every 10 seconds, meaning that within 1 minute, a full Sassanid gun of horse archers could theoretically saturate a target area with 60,000 arrows. Typical range for massed barrages was around 150 meters, while more precise targeting would be done within 50 meters. Such a deluge would slowly whittle enemy numbers and soften up formations for more dedicated attacks by heavy cavalry. Particularly stubborn units might be drawn out by feigned fight, where they could be further bloodied using the Parthian shot, before eventually being isolated and run down. This sort of approach could be rinsed and repeated until victory was achieved, and is best described at the Battle of Carrhae. Variants of this tactic certainly existed, one of which was the three-wave attack. The way it worked is that a first wave of lancers would charge out, forcing the enemy to cluster together. Then, a second wave of horse archers would ride in to shoot the crowded foe. And finally, a third wave of lancers would thunder in to break the battered lines. The advantage of this approach was that it rapidly forced the enemy to adapt to different conditions, and in doing so, a fatal weakness would be exposed. This was quite devastating on inexperienced troops, but so long as a disciplined force held the line, they could weather the storm. Over time, the habitual rivals of the Sassanid would learn to adapt to this form of warfare. It's for this reason that we see the Espar evolve over time as well. This meant deploying a wider mix of troop types such as super heavy cavalry, foot infantry, and elephants. By the 6th century AD, this led to a new order of battle with 3 sections. Here, horse archers might screen the front, defend the left, or attack the right. Another notable change of later centuries was the merging of horse archer and lancer into a single composite warrior capable of acting in a highly flexible manner. Beyond this, horse archers could be employed in a myriad of other ways as scouts, raiders, pursuers, rear guards, or tactical reserves. Let's now turn to an exploration of their service history. A thorough accounting will be impossible, and so we will have to be sated with an overview of their far-reaching campaigns. In terms of Sassanid history, this all would have begun with the 3rd century AD revolt of King Ardashir against the Parthians, which culminated in the Battle of Hormozgan in 224. Here, over 20,000 mostly mounted forces clashed in the open plains. Horse archers almost certainly traded heavy blows in the exchange, but it was ultimately the charge of the heavy cavalry which won Ardashir his throne. In the decade that followed, his horse archers would continue to fight similar troops in the bid to take over the whole of the Parthian Empire. By the year 231, these would have reached the Roman Empire and participated in Ardashir's raids against Roman Mesopotamia. Emperor Severus Alexander would lead a massive counterattack. This proved initially successful in the highlands of Armenia and northern Media, but encountered significant troubles once they descended into the more open plains. Herodian describes the climax of the campaign during the Battle of Ctesiphon as follows, quote, Ardashir attacked the Roman army unexpectedly with his entire force and trapped them like fish in a net. The outnumbered Romans were unable to stem the attack of the Persian horde. They used their shields to protect those parts of their bodies exposed to the Persian arrows. Content merely to protect themselves, they offered no resistance. As a result, all the Romans were driven into one spot, where they made a wall of their shields and fought like an army under siege. Hit and wounded from every side, they held out bravely as long as they could, but in the end, all were killed. Over the following years, Sassanid and Roman armies would fight a bloody series of wars across their contested border. The tide began to turn in the 240s AD during the reign of Shapur I, who defeated Emperor Gordian at the Battle of Maishk, Emperor Valerian at the Battle of Barbalissos, and finally at the Battle of Edessa. Unfortunately, history leaves us no details regarding the specific tactics for these glorious affairs. However, we can be sure that the horse archers played a key role in achieving victory by way of the various maneuvers we previously described. By this point, the Sassanids had rightly earned the respect of the Romans, who increasingly sought to adopt Eastern ways of war as a means to counter them. This was especially true during the Byzantine Wars, which broke out during the 5th and 6th centuries. One of the great climaxes of these struggles would take place as the legendary General Belisarius fought a furious series of campaigns against King Kavad. Here, both sides cleverly leveraged horse archers, ambushes, feigned fights, pit traps, and mailed charges to brutal effect. But it wasn't just against the Byzantines that the Espar were tested. They also frequently fought massive wars against the hostile tribes of Central Asia. Invading armies of the White Huns and later the Turks, for instance, precipitated cavalry-on-cavalry battles of epic proportions, of which we are only dimly aware of. On other fronts, the Sassanids engaged with yet more emerging foes, such as the Arabs of the south. Initial campaigns and the building of new fortifications were at first able to keep these various foes at bay, but by the 7th century, the Sassanid Empire was thoroughly exhausted. This apparent weakness was identified by the Rashidun Caliphate, which now launched its devastating invasion. Unfortunately, we are left in the dark regarding the specific involvement of the Persian horse archers in the stubborn resistance of the Espar. Ultimately, however, they and the Sassanid Empire would fall. Yet, this was not to be the end of such warriors. For centuries to come, their descendants would carry on the millennia-long tradition of horse and bow, under the banner of Islam. But that story will have to wait for another time. We hope you've appreciated this exploration of the woefully underappreciated history of the Sassanids and their impressive military. Please let us know which unit you'd like to see covered next, and be sure to head over to our Patreon, where you can catch sneak peeks of upcoming content and download the amazing art for each episode. A big thanks to the current patrons for funding the channel, and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.